This episode is for the high achieving woman who feels mostly fine. Life is full, energy is good, and on paper, everything looks normal. But what if normal isn't the same as optimal? As we enter our 40s and 50s, how you support your body now shapes how you'll feel, move, and show up in the next phase of your life. Today's conversation is about learning how to dance with the natural rhythm of the body because there's an opportunity to sustain energy, resilience, and vitality long before anything starts to fall apart. Welcome to Star Potential, the podcast for curious, soul led humans who know there's more available and want to explore it with depth, joy, and a little play. Here, we talk about reclaiming your authentic voice, shedding old identities, and expanding into who you're becoming without taking yourself too seriously. I'm your host, Julie Jo Hughes. Let's get curious, let it be fun, and see what ignites. There's a rhythm to the body that most of us don't really learn how to notice until something forces us to slow down. Today's conversation is a follow-up with Sadie Kaufman, founder of the Sadie Kaufman Method. She's been on the podcast before, and this time we're talking about what happened when I actually went through her process myself. What changed in my body, what changed in my habits, and what surprised me when everything looked normal, but my body was telling a deeper story. What I realized through this work is that the body is communicating long before anything feels wrong, if you know where to look and how to listen. Sadie, welcome back.
Hi, nice to see you.
After a few months of working together, one of the things that really stood out to me is how much shifted without anything really being wrong to begin with. I felt mostly fine when I came to you. So, if we start there, when I came to you in that place where nothing was broken, but I wanted to understand my trajectory of aging, where did you begin?
What was different about the work that we started together is the information that we had going in. When I met with you, your concerns were very common and made a lot of sense. But the method that I work with and that I have a small team supporting, it all focuses and starts with blood testing, very specific blood tests that we review first before we look at the questionnaire and the history of the client. Because even for us, the more you hear about the story of the person and they tell you their perspective, it inevitably shapes what we expect and what we think is going on and all of these details. And what I was able to see just from the blood tests is that, first of all, and I think I told you this in the first consultation, I was struck by how much was going right.
Yes, which was great to
Um,
hear.
But it was extremely clear that there were some very specific signs of stress. And the stress that I was seeing kept coming up over and over again. And it was very clarifying, really. It wasn't that there was anything wrong. It's just that there was a lot of repetitive overuse of energy and the nervous system in a way that was really evident. And so that's where we started. I was able to see that. And I think I mentioned that for us, skin and hair health and really beauty and radiance is actually a side effect of metabolic efficiency. So we did already start talking about hormones in the first session because that's such a huge question for women in their 30s and beyond, and it really should be. But just as with you, as with any client, we don't dive into hormones first. We never do. We want to see the metabolic environment that the hormones are functioning in as the starting point. And what I was seeing in your case was stress signs that would absolutely have an effect on hormones, but that are not fixed by hormones. And
Mm.
so I started talking to you about that. And also, I could see literally in your blood tests the pace that you keep.
Yeah.
And you haven't, I mean, you're a performer, and all of us as moms are juggling and we're doing a lot. But in your case, you have this actual work on stage and in the public that requires a whole other level on top of that.
Yes, and definitely we'll get into the emotional side. It was really interesting to me because you're telling me back a story that you're reading from my blood. And it's making me emotional listening to it because I felt so seen. It's like, huh, my blood is telling the story of the fact that I give more than I have to give, that I'm running on fumes a lot of times, that I have a lot of energy, but I'm pulling it from places where I shouldn't really be pulling it from. And it was just fascinating to me that you can see all of that pattern recognition through the blood.
That's one of the most amazing parts of this work. The whole method is founded on the idea that there must be more information to guide good decisions as you're trying to take care of yourself and your family. The method grew out of my own crisis when I was a young woman with health problems that were not resolvable by all these different doctors that I was going to. And I felt like a combination of parts that didn't fit together correctly. And I was in my early 20s, and it was such a horrible feeling to feel like there was no instruction manual and that I would somehow go through my life sort of trying to deal with very untenable symptoms, and that would just be my life and I would be on all sorts of medication. And as I dug into my own case, that's what I found, is that there's a whole other level that the body can reveal if the right information is looked for. And
Mhm.
so this has evolved over more than 20 years. And in this process of working with this method and with many, a hugely diverse client base, what I've seen is that there's so much opportunity to see a person in so much nuance and on so many levels just from this lens.
Mm.
And that what you're expressing, that emotion, it comes up so consistently that I would say it's a hallmark of this. So I think of myself kind of as a mechanic for bodies.
Mm.
What this work is about is we start with the blood work. So there's actually another voice that comes first before your meaning making that we all do. And
Mhm.
what I get to do in this work that I really am moved by is sharing the lens and the perspective of the body to somebody before the story. It can be so moving, even for somebody with a really big built up identity of this is how I am, I've always been this
Mhm.
way. This work is based on how changeable all of that is when you have the right information and you can respond to what shows up in a very specific and actionable way. So the fact that you were moved, it really makes sense because it's a very tangible way of working with potential.
Yes. Yes. I love how you speak about the body as almost the third partner in the work here. It's so true that the body has its own story it's trying to tell us all the time if we listen to it, and then you have this very skilled method of what to look for in the body, because the interesting thing is if you just were going over my lab results, I'm pretty much in the green in most areas. It's like, yep, she's healthy, but my body was actually telling you a more detailed story when you knew where to look for these patterns. And what we really wanted to talk about was optimum, right? It's like, well, yes, you can get by with what you're doing, but also as we start to learn kind of at this life stage too, is that sometimes what's been working all this time suddenly starts to feel like it's not working anymore. And we're like, why? I've always done this before. And that's the things that you're able to prevent and even reverse, right? I want to pause here for a second and speak directly to the women listening. I didn't start working with Sadie because something was wrong. I did it because I wanted to age well and keep my energy. And what surprised me was realizing how long the body can compensate before anything actually looks broken.
Yeah. You said something that I want to build on, which
Mhm.
is the difference between normal and optimal. They're actually a world of difference. There's nothing in common there, actually. It really is the essence of the difference in our perspective. So when you're talking about what is normal, first of all, the way that that is determined is by taking an individual's blood tests, whatever test they do, and comparing them to a general population, to a wide range of what is commonly considered normal in a general population. But that is actually, by our standards, totally irrelevant. It's only relevant when there is a pathology or a very extreme deviation from the norm. But beyond that, it's really unlikely that any practitioner is going to extract really, really valuable information for you because each person is a unique microenvironment. While there are general themes that are common, the way that this microenvironment functions normally and optimally are very specific to this person and what they are living now.
Mhm.
And so that's a very different perspective about what the body is capable of, but it also starts to unravel a whole perspective on aging and what we should all expect as we get older. Because again, normal versus optimal. I see people over the full spectrum of life, from little kids all the way up to our oldest client died at 103. But
Wow.
what I see in common, even in teenagers, but much more common once you get into your 20s and beyond, people casually saying, well, I'm not as young as I used to be, like using that as a justification. Like they start to
Mhm.
share what they're dealing with and they assume that what they're experiencing is normal for their age. And that is something that is really important for me is, first of all, creating a map for each person and putting two very important points on that map. What's the landscape of this microenvironment over many systems? And then where is this person now? Where is the actual function over many systems? What's happening? And then where is optimal? Once we have those 2 points on this map, we can start to really take steps to create metabolic efficiency. And that is my work. And that's my goal for everyone that's very outside of age. So you are such an interesting example. You really took the work so deeply, and it isn't for everyone, so it resonated, and I want you to sort of speak about that for yourself. But you managed in a very short time to create more metabolic efficiency in a very objective and trackable way than you had. And that we were able to do that by first creating this very specific map that you will then always be able to refer back to as we do as we continue this work. It just becomes more detailed and more specific once we have a clear starting point.
Yes, absolutely. When it comes to these type of changes, and yes, I took it very seriously because I knew that the more closely I followed your recommendations, we could get a clearer picture of the possibilities and really what's happening. And so we kind of took things back to a clean slate so that we could see. And what I notice now is that my body communicates to me very quickly when something is supportive of my bodily environment, and it very quickly communicates when it's not. And I feel like that is such a gift of the deep dive that we did because, as you've told me many times, this is about sustainability. It's about living your life. So it's not about never treating yourself or, going outside the lines. But what it is about is understanding what is optimal for you. And when you understand that, you naturally it's not like you can decide to go outside the lines, but I will tell you that when I go way outside the lines for a while, I just feel like, you know what? I felt better when I was over here in what my body likes. And I still enjoy my eating experience is very pleasurable. And we talked about that. But I love that just like all of the deep spiritual work that I talk about all the time, a lot of times I think that someone could look at my life today and look at my life 3 years ago and say, "What? It doesn't seem that much different to me." Like, but from my side, my life is drastically different than it was 3 years ago because of all the inner work I've been doing. And I feel like your work is draws there's so many parallels there. It's you will see the changes on the outside, but where the most change is happening is at the cellular level. Things are literally changing from the inside out.
That's so true. And it's a different perspective on discipline. So when a lot of people hear that this is a food first approach,
Mhm.
they hear diet, and they
Right.
very often hear so many of the things that they've heard over their lives about trying to be perfect, having a rigid diet, trying to maintain a diet long term. And while we are really passionate about using food as the first stabilizing influence, because the idea is that this is a system that's meant to use food as a messenger to send information throughout the body. And so the idea is that nothing can replace food. You can be taking all kinds of other interventions and supplements, but if you don't have your diet, at least understand what a diet that is dialed into your cellular landscape really looks like, then we're working in abstraction, and it's not going to really serve us. So there is a food first approach. But that being said, our perspective is so different than most functional nutritionists and practitioners that work with food. And as I listen to their perspective, I'm so often struck by how different I see things. My perspective that we used for you and I use for every single client is I start by thinking, I want this person to be as healthy in a very precise and specific way, and literally as adaptable to stress as this person can be. But in the real world, that exists now, full of stressors, imperfect food, actually really inflammatory food, all of that, I'm taking it as a given that that's the context that we all live in. And so I don't want to demonize the environment. And really, that my goal is not to put you in a bubble and to protect you. I want you to thrive in the environment that we have. And so, with that as the starting point, we do have 30 days for each of our clients that we ask them to do the most disciplined work with their diet, but it's literally 4 weeks. And at the end of 4 weeks, we retest very targeted markers for each person to see the results of our work. And once I see that, the goal changes. And it is right away, where can we add more flexibility and expand this to a more normal life? And then the priority becomes not how we can maintain and hold on to this version of health, but it's how to recover. And especially when we're working with becoming more efficient and energy efficient on a cellular level, then we have this energy to use to be more adaptable. And that's really my perspective for how I guide food, but also what I'm guiding in terms of hormones and everything. It's so that each person can really be more flexible. And then long term, they're not, nobody that we work with stays on a rigid diet long term ever. We are against that, even if they're dealing with intense diagnosis. The idea is you work with food to get certain results, and then you may use the diet that we guide you towards as your base. When you're cooking and buying food just for yourself, you might keep it relatively anti inflammatory in a specific way for you. However, I am against having people go to restaurants and ask their friends the long list of every ingredient in the food that they're being served, because community and being connected and being treated and treating yourself is actually really important to my version of a good quality life and health.
You're right. That is a big part of the work that we did together. You said, yeah, you are going to have these weekends where I'm working these 3 nights back to back. And so now how do we work with that? So now you go and do that and go live on the road and have fun. And this is what you do to help your body recover on the other 4 days of the week or whatever. It's about living your life and learning how to support yourself to be optimal throughout all the twists and turns. So I love that. I want to pause again here because this was a big shift for me. This wasn't about becoming more strict or being perfect. It was about understanding what actually supports my energy and then having the freedom to live my life without constantly guessing. And I think that's an important distinction, especially for women who are used to pushing through and figuring it out later.
It's also
As
about the long game. So it isn't about like, even if somebody comes to me and says, like, I want to lose weight or I want more energy, we are taking that into consideration that this is where they want in the short term to see results and feel better. But we always are holding the vision of this person, not only feeling better in the short term, but really protecting their best quality health, energy, and performance long term. And that, I don't see that happening in the context of a rigid diet. And so it's like the more detail you learn about your own microenvironment and the more compassion you gain from hearing the voice of your metabolism and your body speaking to you and
Mhm.
seeing the one common theme that I've seen over so many different cases over all these years is how hard the body works for you to adapt to whatever you're doing and however you're living to try to keep homeostasis or metabolic balance as well as possible, even when it's failing. It's very, very often doing all possible to support you. And that is a very different story than so many people, but especially women of this stage of life have. A lot of times when they start to notice changes in their energy, changes in maybe their hair quality or skin quality, they might feel or think, my body is failing me and it doesn't work or it's not doing what it should. And it maybe even they might even think it's working against. And I certainly felt that. That was a really painful, repetitive thought that I would have as a young woman is like, my body doesn't work like other women's and it's something's very wrong. And it was such a lonely and sad feeling. But now I learned for myself that it was overcompensating and working way too hard because it was in an emergency that nobody had detected for years and years and years. And it was sort of breaking down, being left in this emergency mode. And that just knowing that, it was really comforting in a sense.
Yeah. Our body is always supporting us and it's always communicating to us and it wants to be in optimal health and it's always doing its best job to do that and to rearrange things and to take from wherever it needs to take from to keep us healthy. You're very passionate about this work and the opportunity that we as women have if we kind of get on this train before it starts derailing, right? And we discovered some interesting things about my hormones, and I even came to you and said, I don't know if there's anything to really see with my hormones. You like my cycle is very regular, and then you were like, "Well, actually, I have some other things I could tell you." So let's go there.
Okay. I'm so glad you brought that up. This particular subject of hormones and hormone optimization is one of the closest to my heart because what I actually had in my early 20s were all of the symptoms of menopause, but at
Oh.
20 years old. And so for me, those symptoms were not normal, healthy, or natural. They were a nightmare, actually. I haven't even started perimenopause now in my 50s because
Wow.
I didn't use the eggs that I had. My hormones were so disrupted in my early 20s that they basically
Wow.
paused all of the sort of process of my hormones. And that would have been really bad had I not intervened and resolved it. I would have ended up in menopause very, very young and with fast tracked aging because of that. But what actually happened was the reverse, which is I unraveled all the complication and mess of my hormones, and I gave my body what it was needing in order to sort of correct the hormonal choreography. And that is the message that I can share it from such a unique vantage point for other women, which is all women who have a menstrual cycle, they're dealing with hormones expressing in a very, very precise choreography over the cycle. And this idea of if you have a period or a menstrual cycle, then you have normal hormones is just making assumptions based on really a very limited amount of information. And so hormones are so critical for health, both to create a baby and to have a healthy life as a young person, as a young woman, but it's also critically important to understand and to optimize this choreography for our long term health, for the quality of our bones and our brains and our inflammatory burden for the rest of our lives. So, this is kind of like the operating system for longevity for both sexes, but especially for women, because the choreography that produces ovulation around day 15 and a menstrual cycle or period is so specific. We can find a world of detail that affects every aspect of our life. It affects our energy, our emotions, our sleep. So often women come to us and they say, "Oh, well, I've already done hormone tests. I don't think I need to do them again." And my doctor said, "Do them whenever. I can do them on just any day," or they ask maybe for the day one or day 3 or 4 of the menstrual cycle. And for us,
Yes.
that's the same thing almost as having no information.
Wow.
Yes. And you are such an interesting example of this because you basically said when we sat down that you felt like your hormones were normal. Mhm. And
Right.
then when we looked at your hormone tests on day 21 of your cycle, which is when we always ask for them in our work, only on day 20 or 21, if the first day of your period is day one. But what I found was two very interesting pieces of information for you. Your estradiol, or the key estrogen in your blood, was quite a bit, about 25 points lower than I would expect a woman who's ovulating regularly to be. So that's really caught my attention. And then your progesterone and estrogen and progesterone together create the two dominant hormones in a woman's body when she's ovulating regularly at that stage of life that create fertility, those two
Mhm.
together. And both of them were quite lower than I would expect for a woman with a regular menstrual cycle. And that was
Mhm.
one of the ways that I was able to look at all of your metabolic markers plus these hormone markers and say, this is the effect of long term, unrelenting stress, even birth
That's
stress.
crazy.
So it's
Yeah.
not, and it isn't a value judgment or anything like
Mhm.
that, because the thing is, the body, especially a woman's body, doesn't necessarily distinguish between good and bad stress.
Mm.
So a really intense life full of inspiration where you're asked to perform and you know you can do it. That's amazing. But one of the questions that I ask in my work is what is the price for that? And
Mhm.
is that price something that you're willing and able to pay now and long term? Or should we take a different look at how you're living and what you're expecting of yourself so that we can make the priority long term stability and sustainability of your performance. And that's
Mhm.
really what I saw specifically in your hormones that was telling a story that we really needed to pay attention to, which was you were robbing your own energy levels and your hormone levels by demanding too much of yourself one moment after the next, kind of chronically, without that chance to recover and recover in a rhythmic way. You were literally, you had drawn down your reserves to such a point where your hormones weren't functioning at the level that would be ideal for a woman at your stage of life.
Right. I love that you call it choreography of the hormones. That's very much in my world. But it is like, how can we play this dance of sometimes I'm here, and when I go there, I make sure, I rebound or recover here.
This last year, I started thinking really differently about my work. An idea came to me that leaders and people who have really intensive lives, and mothers always kind of fit into that category, but leaders are athletes. And athletes need to be very conscientious about when they're performing and when they're recovering. And
Mm,
how do you balance that? No top level performer sustains their quality of performance by being random. And that's
right.
what you're such an interesting example, because your performance is not random and you've honed what you expect of yourself and the sort of standard and the quality that you work at. But your self care and self support didn't mirror that because you weren't working from enough detailed information. And I
Hmm.
think that's one of the more long term changes that I see for you from this work. And I see this is why I experienced you as such a great fit for this work really naturally, because once you have the information and the level of detail that we can offer with that analysis, it was almost like you were ready to implement. There wasn't a bigger obstacle there for you. It was more like you needed to be checking very particular data points and metrics. Now that you have that information, I've seen you've made a paradigm shift that I can see in your blood work. And that's very, very different than trying to maintain a diet for a little while and then falling
Hmm.
off the wagon and trying to find your way back. It's like a different view. And the people who get this view and really benefit from it the most are typically people who are high performers and they're in an intensive life, and it's almost like this aha experience where it's not this rigid difficult thing. It's more like, oh, I only have to make these little tweaks, like, but that makes such a difference when they're so specific. Like, it's very
Yes.
different than clean eating, like, oh, I should just eat
Yes.
cleaner. That doesn't actually mean anything. There's
Hmm.
only eating to get to a new place from wherever you're starting. And we had a really clear assessment of what that looked like for you. And now what I expect for you is, with less and less rigidity, you're going to have long-term gains. But more than gains metabolically or even in your hormones, I think the biggest gain is prioritizing yourself as a way to care for those around you and to show up at your best in every way. So the idea is this: you can't give what you don't have, especially as a woman, and especially as we cross the threshold of into our 40s. If we're in survival mode, hormonally, metabolically, people can feel that around us, especially our children, before we even open our mouths.
Mm.
I would say anything. And so it isn't who we try to be, and that we try to say the right thing and we try to do all the check off all the things on our list. The people around us either get benefited or harmed by who we're showing up as right now. And that is such a different perspective. It really has very little to do with how hard we try. And that's
Right.
kind of a little sad to hear sometimes as moms, because we're trying and we know we're not living up to what we would like to be doing. But what I hear over and over again is, so many other areas in my life have improved or shifted with this work.
Yes. And of course, I'm the one who is always looking for the deeper layers. That is where I specialize, is noticing what's going on beneath what we're actually just seeing on the outside, right? And that was my favorite part of the work. It's from a spiritual lens. It's like you said, the process that we're going through, it's like a lot of spiritual truths. Once you see The absolute truth. You can't unsee it. It's like, now that I know this, how can I possibly go back to living the way I used to live? Because
Mm.
I can't unknow what I know now.
Yeah.
Um, and side note, I just have to say, my favorite thing that you've ever said to me, and I repeat it often to my husband, is Sadie compares my work to a professional athlete.
Mm.
I said, I have never been referred to as an athlete before, but that was so great for me because I was like, you know what? I do need to treat my work like that though, because I treat my work with so much respect that it does have to be looked at like the way an athlete does what they do. It's like I can have these moments of extreme because I know also how to rest and recover. I know how to bounce back.
Yeah.
And so that was a big thing for me. I think that a lot of what I was going through, it uncovered all of these other layers for me. And I kind of touched earlier on the emotional aspect of it. But I know, especially during the first 30 days when we were really like trying to get a starting point, as your body is kind of getting rid of what is no longer serving it, and you're literally moving these blockages of like physical, tangible things in your body. But of course, my belief is that they also carry an energetic weight to them as well. And as those things are being shed, I'm feeling them on an
Mm.
energetic level, on an emotional level. I remember one session I told you it was really weird, but this music came on and I started dancing to it. And I usually don't dance to that kind of music. And I started crying. And I don't usually do a lot of crying. And I didn't know what that was about. But it was like just part of the process of shedding what's no longer supportive to me and being able to, I guess, experience that in a physical way of this is what I'm letting go of and this is what I'm welcoming more of. This is what
Mm.
I'm nurturing my body with. And what we really moved through was that it's not about restricting yourself and cutting all these things out that you should never have. It's really about putting in the biggest building blocks first.
Yeah.
And when we do that, our body is supported, it's able to do the things that it needs to do. And so it's really about learning how to support your body with those big building blocks. And so, both with our baseline and with the specific hormone work that we're doing now, I really feel like that's what I'm learning with you how to do and how to support myself long term. I would love for you to talk about the grandma analogy that you give to me because I just think it's funny. You talk about that our bodies sort of go into this like, it's okay, I'm the grandma now. Like, that's for the young ones now. You can have this energy because I don't need as much of it anymore, and we are just not those kind of women, like, we're definitely not in grandma mode. So
No. It's this is something that I really don't hear talked about nearly enough. One thing that I've learned from you working with hormones as such an important lens of this work is hormones are signalers to every single cell in the body. That's what a hormone's job is. And when when the hormones get dysregulated, whether it's because of the menopause and perimenopause transition, or it's because of a very stressful life earlier on, there's lots of different reasons that hormones can get dysregulated. But when they do get dysregulated, it affects signaling in the body that goes far beyond fertility and hormonal processes that we're familiar with. So this is an area where the the more we know and the more precise our own hormones can be functioning over the course of our lives, it's a central modulator for everything from our nervous system, our ability to recover, but also our ability to absorb our nutrients from the food that we're eating. Um, maintain strong bones and muscles, all of these, the whole scope of what it means to be healthy. We can't have that conversation without the piece of understanding how hormones fit in. And so a big part of my perspective is that we need to understand hormones, men, women, even, in children, in all ages. But around this moment in lives when so many women's hormones are shifting, but nobody is checking or managing or tracking that process, to me, it's very much akin to letting the wheels fall off the bus. Like there is a process happening that nobody's tracking and they just keep driving. They drive and revving that engine and pushing the gas and wanting their acceleration. And then like finally, after a whole odyssey of probably many different symptoms that have maybe been, misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and a woman putting, this is super important, more and more direct pressure on herself, have to keep going, have to keep it all together. And then she falls into, could be a chronic disease. There's a whole spectrum of ways that things show up in a really extreme way when hormones are not addressed mindfully and in my perspective, as early as possible. Here's why. Because when we don't test hormones correctly, first of all, we don't even know where a woman is, even when she's young and she has a period. Because from my perspective, the period is not the big event of the menstrual cycle. Ovulation is. And if you're not ovulating, many, many women can still have a period. But if you're not ovulating, it will show up very, very, very clearly in the right blood tests. And it'll show up even in very young women who look otherwise healthy. Right?
Wow.
So that's important. But if ovulation is not taking place and these hormones, starting with the two key hormones, but filtering out into all the entire hormone profile in the thyroid, are going to be radically affected by the growing imbalance between the different hormones because the choreography is off. So many women, based on my experience tracking these tests and these markers, may stop menstruating not because they've run out of eggs, but because their hormones have become so dysregulated that the choreography cannot be sustained. So it shuts
Wow.
down. This is really a phenomenon that I'm seeing a lot more than I would have expected. But the other thing is this. Every cell in the body is benefited by the activity of estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen maybe in a more dominant way, but they oppose each other in a very specific balance. So when these two hormones are in balance with each other, they are sending a message to every cell in the body of vitality, order, cohesiveness, synchronicity. It's a way in which the body is being managed and organized and sending information to itself about things are going as expected. There's order here, all is well. And that literally affects that balance, what the benefits that we get from our food. As that balance gets disrupted and we start to send through our hormones and the hormone disruption a message of dysregulation and chaos to every cell in the body, what we get is what happens in nature. In any dysregulated system, the system gets downregulated. So when there's chaos and the normal sort of process is not being respected, the system starts to shut down. And that is my definition of what's actually happening when women think like, oh, I'm not as young as I used to be. And I guess is normal and what it should be. What my language that I use, I call it the estrogen glow. So the benefit of estrogen in the body is so important to every cell for a woman that we don't age gradually, actually. What we do is we use every single bit of the estrogen that we have available to our cells. And once it's really, really gone, which is typically 5 years after our last period, that is when real vulnerability and lack of resilience sets in. So our genetic vulnerabilities, all these things really start to show up in a very dramatic way, not whether or not you have symptoms during menopause. And so that whole
Mm.
conversation of like, well, I don't feel anything, I guess I'm perfectly fine. I think it's a
Mhm.
missed opportunity because even sometimes the women who feel more have a more pronounced opportunity because they feel the call to intervene. Whereas women who don't feel anything, the progression is still happening and they're still going to end up in a state of uh, estrogen extreme deficiency that can and most likely will turn on all these other down regulations in an optimal
Right.
system. So that's what I say in terms of the, I don't know if this is a really a nice way of saying it, but it's kind of in my own mind, the fast track to granny land.
Yes.
And it's just my own way of thinking about it because in my 50s, when I look at my grandmother, I was born when my grandmother was around my age, and she was all gray. She had cut her hair short. She had raised all her children. She was wearing very sensible clothes, and she was an artist and really into amazing things. But the pictures that I look at her when she was my age, she had kind of decided that her work was in the background
Uh-huh.
in a sense to kind of support her family. And she did a great job with it. And even though her passion was for art, she wasn't out there making her name as an artist. You
Mhm.
know, that's really what I see is that she had sort of decided that she was the support figure in the story. And what's fascinating to me is that your body gets that same message from your
Mhm.
hormones. Oh,
Mhm.
your hormones are so dysregulated, and that's the progression happening that you're not getting the full benefit of all that you're doing. Your energy is declining. And that is something that isn't just an aspect of aging. It's something
Mhm.
that we can map, we can track, and we can intervene with. And that is what I'm really passionate for myself because I want to decide how long I have optimal performance and how long I am the central figure in my own life.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
I want
Mm.
that for I want that for every woman. And here's something that I don't know. I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but my sense is there's all this sort of story in the US of like, oh, it's a youth culture and like it's so hard for older women because there's so much emphasis on youth and being young. I don't know if I agree.
Yeah.
I think for myself, if I see a woman over 40, but certainly over 50, who looks really radiant and
Mhm.
isn't trying to be young and isn't like meticulously trying to sort of stave anything off, but really is about being the best version of herself and really sort of holding the space for the life that she really wants. I cannot look away personally. I
Right.
I love it. I mean, my eye goes right there, and I feel like that person, that woman, is actually good news. Like
Mhm.
it's so it's almost it's just it's really exciting to see that. And so that's a huge part of what I care so much about. I feel like we have a lot of wisdom to share, but when you
Mhm.
can share that in a way that's really showing up in a way that your energy is sustainable and you're not making yourself into a martyr, people again can feel that. And that's a very different energy that you're putting out into the world. And so that's something that I'm very inspired to share more broadly.
Yes, you are a leader on this forefront. I think that it's absolutely shifting. I think it used to be that way in the US that the 25-year-olds are who held the power, and that's who we look to. As a woman in her early 40s, I do not look to the 20-year-old influencers to see what I should be doing with my skin and things like that. Who I am empowered by is the 50, the 60-year-old women that are out there being radiant queens that are saying, yes, I have stepped into my era of wisdom And now, with that wisdom, I am in my sovereign power to really do what I came here to do. And now I have the experience, the wisdom, and still the beauty because I take care of myself to go out and spread my message to the world. And this is how I'm showing up as my full self. When I was in my 30s, I still had a lot of insecurities because I wasn't 20 anymore and trying to figure out, oh gosh, like, what do I do? Because I'm going to start looking 40 soon. And now in the 40s, it's like, wait a second, this new era is like, who has the power are the wise women. We are the ones that are changing and leading the world. Like, if we want to go big here, it's like the patriarchy is crumbling. We're finally realizing, oh, wait a second. There's a reason why the villages had the wise old woman, because she is this wealth, this treasure of knowledge. But where we're shifting it now is that she doesn't have to fade into the background and become the one who's just supporting everyone. She's actually leading the front. That would be my take on it. I'm kinda getting up on a horse here, but I feel like that's the next place that we're going with our work together is, okay, let's give you this very exact information that we have, and the 2 biggest
Yeah,
things that we're doing with your work are, 1, you can't know these things if you're not looking for them. So you can't just go on assumption that, I feel pretty good. I feel pretty healthy. I think I'm fine. Like it's no longer enough if you want to be optimal, which is what this is all about.
that's exactly right. And to use the kind of car analogy again, what I'm finding as I get older is certain things change and shift, and that's very real. But when you do the testing that we do, you have more specific information than most of us did or even imagined was possible in our earlier years. What I'm finding myself with this moment in life is that I'm able to dial in the details and interact with what's happening rather than just sort of take it as truth. It's like, oh, I'm noticing this. I wonder what effect freeing up excess energy will do for this. So the less excess energy is wasted doing things that you're not even aware of, then you have access to that energy to direct in a conscious way. You can use it as you want to. And what I see that is the defining experience as we get older that everybody has to deal with is we have less margin of error.
Mhm.
That's the big thing that's changing. It's not that we have to decline or that we have to lose our energy and get slowed down and get tired or even like look tired or get old as we go through life, but it does mean that you have to be much more specific about how all of the energy in your body is being used. And that's a huge part of what we're doing. We're looking under the hood again in the
Mhm.
details that you wouldn't have access to if you weren't testing and analyzing those tests in a very particular sort of cluster of information. But once you do, it's not that complicated to figure out where is the energy being overly used and overly sort of spent and how to create more efficiency. And so that's where we can tune up a person so that they're not using and overusing, like in your case, there was already a momentum going in a very particular direction of overwork, over travel without the recovery, and overgive to your family and your kids without sort of recovery. And the progression of that would be early hormonal decline that led to probably menopause at an earlier age and all of the dysregulation that comes with that. But because I was able to spot it in the blood test, not relying on how you feel, I could see that you felt relatively well, even with this hormonal dysregulation and decline, because you're young and you
Yeah.
have extra energy to spend however you want. And you were spending that energy doing things that were not conducive to your best long-term health. And so that's a huge part of this work is like digging deeper, finding more information that's very specific and clear that you can work with the support of the team that really knows what we're looking at and is very practical and knows what order we need to do the steps in. But at your moment, what it looks like is being able to control the energy that you have and the performance that you want much longer than would be considered typical.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's keeping things in rhythm, bringing it back to the dance analogy. I love that. I mean, when you were talking about the orchestrating of the hormones and how they dance together and they signal everything else, I was thinking about I mean, that's how music is. Like when the bass and the drums, like we call that the rhythm section, when they are locked in, everybody else knows exactly where to go, and it's easy to follow and to kind of
That's right.
fall in line. If those 2 that are laying down the rhythm section are off, everyone else is doing their best, but it's really hard for everything to really lock in, and so that's the analogy that makes sense to me is like, well, of course, like, when these 2 hormones are locked in to each other and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, then naturally everything else is working more efficiently. And the biggest part that we're doing together that you're teaching me is like once you have this information, now we can do something about it. It's not just about finding the information and going, okay, well, here's what we found out. It's now we're strategically saying, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we can sustain this energetic rhythm for longer and stronger, right?
What you said is really well put. This idea of rhythm and how the difference between music that inspires and noise is actually quite
Mhm,
a fine line. And it
mhm,
really does come down to organization and sort of rhythm, as you're saying. If that rhythm is organized and managed correctly, it sounds transformative and
mhm,
transcendent. If it's not, it sounds like a mess that nobody wants, that people want to get away from.
mhm,
And so I hormones are really there's a mirroring of that sort of language in our hormones. But something that I want to sort of take this opportunity to clarify, once we have the information and we know what's happening in the body, it opens up opportunities to discuss very specifically what we do with this information. And that those next steps are not, they're not the same for each person, and they're not
mhm,
even the same for each stage of life. So it's really important that mapping and the locating is always the most important step, and it really opens up a wide range of possibilities for each person to make the best, most educated decisions for themselves based on that information. And so, with hormones, first of all, we need to consider what's happening right now. What are the hormones telling us in the context of the larger sort of metabolic landscape? Very important. But then from there, we need to understand, where is this woman in her life stage? If it's a younger woman who's much, if there's dysregulation and she's, pretty young for this dysregulation, our goal is to stabilize and support her own hormonal rhythm as it would naturally be without replacing hormones. We're not necessarily, we're not trying to cover anything up. A lot of women, when they go to their doctors at this stage of life with, my skin isn't very great and I'm not sleeping that well, so many doctors will want to put you on birth control. They'll give
mhm,
you synthetic hormones that will just cap the information that your own hormones are giving you, and they'll give you a false sense of stability. It's not accurate because your own hormones and that progression is still happening. You just don't
mhm,
have access to it in the same way. And you've got synthetic hormones sort of signaling for you on top of your own hormones. I'm not a
mhm,
fan of that, especially for this stage of life. What I would prefer is to first understand where your own hormones are, how they're expressing, and then I want to support the body to clean up and improve that rhythm as long as possible. So we will give, for example, if we see a woman who's got normal estradiol, which is the key estrogen, but her progesterone is really low, maybe she's under a lot of stress, lots of different possibilities. What we'll typically do in that case is give her oral bioidentical progesterone, but only in the stage of her cycle where that would be there. It's kind of
Mhm.
like we mimic, we help her recreate the right environment where ovulation would be natural to
Mhm.
kind of support her body to do that on its own, to get closer to what would happen in her body if she were to ovulate. And what
Mm.
can happen with that kind of sort of gentle nudging
Mhm.
and work on this level of detail is that so many women, their bodies get that message and they start up because it's not just putting the
Mhm.
hormones in, it's also letting a woman know that the safer she feels
Mm.
in the over the course of her menstrual cycle, those 28 or days of the cycle, if she's cultivating safety, both physically but also emotionally, um, she's going to be helping to create the environment where ovulation would be much more likely to take place. So we work on
Mm.
that level, and we also kind of nudge the progesterone into the level at the right time of the cycle that it would be at if she were ovulating. And so this is a
Mhm.
way where we're not trying to micromanage the body or force a result that we want. One word that I think of so often when I think of my work and the body is awe.
Mm.
It's such an amazing system, and
It is.
I I just think it's miraculous, and I wouldn't dream of getting in the way or sort of telling it what it needs to do, and we need to get this result and stop doing this. It's just beyond the scope of what I could ever do, and even I believe science has not caught up at all to the wonder that is the body. And so, what
Yes.
our work is, rather than getting a result that we're looking for. It's first of all getting much more detailed about how it's functioning now, and then looking for the biggest examples of what could be interrupting its optimal function.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's just it's a different perspective, and the thing that I've seen over the course of my career that is I love to share is that I have seen over and over the body rush back to health, even after years and years, and sometimes even decades of really repetitive dysfunction that feels unmovable. When we get to this level of detail and we take the perspective of making little changes in the right direction rather than the most invasive and forcing things to be a certain way, and really coming from the perspective of working with the body, like what can we
Yes.
do to support to create a conducive environment rather than poking this section and
Yes.
making it do what we want. And I love that. I think
Yes. It's about loving our body. It's about nurturing, being grateful to the body for all that it does do. And now let me give back to my body and support it so that it can do what it does because it's already the intelligence of the body is mind blowing to me. The first time I really had true like admiration of the intelligence of the body was going through a pregnancy, right? It's just like I'm like, this has nothing to do with me. My body is somehow growing a human. I don't understand it, but it is amazing, like the absolute intelligence of the design of the body. And so what we do want to do is appreciate it, love it, and support to let it do what it already knows how to do. As you were describing, I kept thinking of it like a loving dance partner. You know, when you're doing like ballroom dance, you know the steps. and your partner knows the steps, but your partner, especially the male partner, will gently guide you by the slightest a little bit of pressure on a fingertip that tells you that we're going this direction. And then all our body has to do is respond to the dance partner. And I feel that was the analogy that I was seeing in my mind when you were describing the work that you do with the hormones. It's like we're not taking over, we're not coming in and saying, "Hey body, we're doing it this way." We're just gently giving a little bit of pressure in this direction and helping to let the
Guidance.
body know this is the direction you want to go in, and the body says, "Oh, okay, we'll go in this direction." And I it's just a dance again. So
It's
beautiful.
a dance. And the good news that just keeps coming up for me is the body wants to be in balance and it wants to
Yes.
heal. And I just love that as a baseline. Like if we can remember that and remember whatever we're dealing with and whatever we're experiencing, that it isn't so often people come to me and come to this work with this big question that's maybe been plaguing them their whole life, sometimes in extreme cases. And the question is, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with
Mm,
my body?
mhm,
And sometimes even this has started in childhood where parents and teachers will be asking that same question about a child, and they really live with that burden on top of them for their whole lives. And what I often find myself saying after looking at the blood tests is, I think you've been asking the wrong question. The
wow.
question here is not what's wrong with me. And in your case, it's not what's wrong with my skin or what's wrong with my energy. It's not like it used to be at this other moment. It's more, what is my body responding to correctly and in a healthy way that I'm not aware of?
Mm,
That was exactly your case, and it's so often the case is that we're not making progress because we're not looking at the right information and we're not working from the right question. We should be assuming that the body has so much wisdom and that it actually knows what it's doing, even if it's
mhm,
doing what, in my case, was blocking ovulation, creating a bunch of hormonal chaos. It was doing that because my diet was way too imbalanced to support fertility. I was,
mhm,
being raised in an extreme vegan environment that wasn't supportive for my ability to be healthy or have a
mhm,
healthy baby. So my body and its wisdom disrupted fertility so that
mhm.
in my fragile state, I wouldn't complicate the matter and get pregnant. And so
Right.
that's a really interesting place to kind of bring this conversation. And we could, of course, take it in many different directions, but I think that's such a great thing for women, our peers, to
Mhm,
really just remember in this. If they take anything away from this conversation, it's that maybe they're asking the wrong question and that this kind of work can be the beginning of a new level of information that they may never have had access to that will allow them to go further with this idea that there could be way more going right than
mhm,
they ever imagined, and that the job from here on is to build on that correctness. And in your case, that was so much the case. You were
mhm,
young and healthy, you still are, but you were overworking and stressing very specific systems in such a repetitive way that you were getting depletion in a way that was impossible to ignore. And what
mhm,
you've done in such a short time is work proactively with those particular weak points,
mhm,
taking it away from a whole identity like, oh, this is just who I am and
mhm.
you were able to unpack that and really work with those specific weak points. And they're not expressing the way that they were.
Right. It's incredible the amount of change that we've seen in such a short time. I remember asking you like, what do you see in 30 days, or like what can we possibly accomplish in 90 days? And then we've seen, oh, a lot actually. Like the body wants to respond quickly. It wants to fall back into health. And so it's very exciting.
Hmm. Well, I'm so glad that we had this opportunity, and it's such a different experience to share from this process that we went through together. And the last thing that I would like to share is something that I observed in you and that I always see in in the clients who really get the most benefit from this work. Your ability to do the work and do it really intensively, especially for those 30 days that we really ask that you implement these very particular changes over day in and day out. It's making an offering. You were making an offering of your own inconvenience and your own discomfort. You were disrupting your normal life in a very clear and specific way that did and does have effects on everything. It's not normal life to follow a particular diet in this way, but you did it. And that offering is the key to your shifting your identity of what's possible for you in your life and in your health. Anybody who uses our guidance to really take this initiative and make this sort of this offering to themselves of something that isn't simple and it isn't done for you. Nobody can do that and take that responsibility for you. I mean, it's really, this is one thing that each person has to decide that it's the moment and they're ready for it. And it's not, it's very okay that it isn't when it isn't the right moment. It's not that like everybody needs to take this on, but when you are able to, you're making an offering to a better quality of life and health and really being the sort of the leader, taking responsibility for how things turn out that has an effect on every aspect of your life. It starts out with very specific work implementing a diet, but it expands from there. And the good that comes from it is this being willing to y- change your habits in a way that isn't necessarily perfectly intuitive or simple. And
Mhm.
certainly, you can vouch for this. It isn't the most convenient things,
Mhm.
but that willingness to continue to follow this evolution, to go on this little journey that's accompanied and to follow the guidelines of this pays benefits long after those 30 days are over. And part of it is
Absolutely.
just seeing yourself differently.
Mhm. It is. Yeah, I will say a lot of the guidance, it was definitely not intuitive. I was like, this is backwards of what I've always thought was best for me. But I don't know. That's what Sadie told me to do. And it was amazing. I was like, oh, how about that? She was right. Like that is what my body wanted, you know? And yeah, you're right. It's a very short-term sacrifice for something that's going to pay you dividends for the rest of your life. So it's absolutely worth it. If there's one thing I hope women take from this conversation, it's this: the body is always communicating, not just when something feels off, but all the time. And learning to tune in isn't about controlling the body or trying to perfect it, but it is about learning its rhythm and working with it instead of against it, dancing with it, so you can keep your energy, your strength, and your vitality for the long haul. This isn't about restriction, it's about creating a baseline where your body feels supported. Hormones aren't just something that change with age. They are responding to how much stress and recovery the body is experiencing. And that's what I appreciated most about this conversation with Sadie. It brings awareness back into the process instead of fear. Well, Sadie, thank you so much for another great conversation that we've had today. And for those that are inspired to learn more about you and your work after this conversation, where can they find you?
We have our website is sadiekaufman.com, and I think we can put that in the show notes. And
Absolutely.
then we're also on Instagram, and we work with clients internationally, really all over the world. Our clients do their blood tests locally, and we can guide clients in the US. We have partners in the US that can do blood tests in a way that is relatively convenient and easy to get the testing that we need to get done. So we work remotely, and it's just a pleasure. It's a pleasure to find the people who are looking for this and to
Yes.
really join forces and to partner together to see what's really possible, to help people get a new level of detail and reach a new level of possibility in how they show up in their lives and what they see as possible in their health.
Absolutely. Your team has been amazing to work with. I've had nothing but amazing things to say. They're so responsive, and sometimes I have some really random and weird questions, and I never seem to throw them off. So it's been just a great experience all around. And thank you for the work you're doing to help us reach our star potential. That's what we're all
Oh,
about here.
excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
If something in this episode lit you up or sparked a little curiosity, you might be in the middle of a soul shift of your own. I created a free quiz called Are You in a Soul Shift to help you explore where you are and what's opening next. Just go to juliejohughes.com/quiz or find the link in the show notes. And if you're enjoying the show, would you please leave a quick rating or review? It helps create a ripple to reach other curious souls. Until next time, stay curious and let yourself play.